Picture this. It is January 16th, 1595. The city of Constantinople is draped in winter fog, and inside the Topkapi Palace, 19 young men are eating what they do not yet know is their last meal. Some are teenagers. One is reportedly still a child. They are the sons of Sultan Murad III, princes of the most powerful empire on earth, and within hours, every single one of them will be dead. Not from war, not from plague, by law. You are standing somewhere in that palace tonight. Maybe you are a janissary guard who has been given an order and told not to ask questions. Maybe you are a palace servant who hears the soft, muffled sounds drifting down the stone corridors and understands instinctively that you should not look. Maybe you are one of the brothers themselves, a young man who grew up inside gilded walls, who was given tutors and musicians and every luxury an empire could provide, and who is only now beginning to understand what those walls really were. This was not a massacre. This was a ceremony, and that distinction, cold, precise, administrative, is what makes it so deeply unsettling centuries later. Tonight, we are going inside one of history's most disturbing legal executions. Not a battlefield, not a dungeon, a throne room succession. And by the end of this video, the word law will feel a little different to you. Let's establish something right away, because this is where most people's mental image of the Ottoman Empire falls apart entirely. When you think about medieval or early modern power, you probably imagine succession crises as chaotic. Brothers raising armies, nobles picking sides, civil wars tearing kingdoms apart for decades. England had the Wars of the Roses. France had its own dynastic bloodbaths. The Byzantine Empire, which the Ottomans replaced, was practically synonymous with the word usurpation. The Ottomans looked at all of that and decided to solve the problem permanently. Their solution was called the Law of Fratricide, and it was codified, actually written down as official state policy, by Sultan Mehmed II, the man who conquered Constantinople in 1453. His legal code, the Kanunname, contained a provision that reads, in translation, roughly as follows. Whichever of my sons inherits the Sultanate, it is acceptable for him to kill his brothers in order to ensure the order of the world. Most scholars have approved of this. Let action be taken accordingly. Read that again. Most scholars have approved of this. The empire did not hide this policy. It did not whisper about it in back rooms. It published it. Jurists debated it. Religious authorities, the ulema, weighed in and, in many cases, endorsed it. The reasoning was coldly utilitarian. A living prince was a potential rival. A potential rival was a potential civil war. A civil war killed tens of thousands of people. Therefore, one death, or 19, was preferable to the chaos of an unresolved succession. You are living inside this system now. You are an Ottoman prince in the late 16th century. From the moment you are born, you are simultaneously the most privileged and the most precarious human being in the empire. You have silk robes and private tutors. You have your own small household within the palace. You are fed the finest food in the known world. You are also, functionally, a hostage of your own bloodline. Your father is Sultan Murad III, a man who ruled for 21 years, from 1574 to 1595. Murad was not particularly beloved by historians. He was known for his deep suspicion of everyone around him, his reliance on court favorites, and one extraordinary biographical fact. He fathered more children than almost any Ottoman sultan in recorded history. By the time of his death, he had over 100 children, of whom at least 40 were sons. Not all of them survived childhood. Disease, palace politics, and sheer statistical misfortune did their work. But 19 of his sons survived long enough to be a problem. And you are about to find out what the empire does with problems. 19 young men were alive when the sun set over Constantinople on January 15th. By the time it rose again, the palace would have a new sultan, and the empire would be 19 brothers smaller. But what you don't know yet is who gave the order, and why even he may not have wanted to. His name was Mehmed III. He was 29 years old when his father died on January 15, 1595. And by the standards of his time, he was not a particularly unusual man. He had been educated in the classical Ottoman fashion. He had served as governor of Manisa, the traditional posting for crown princes, which was meant to prepare future sultans for actual governance. He was described by Venetian ambassadors, who were, frankly, the intelligence analysts of the Renaissance, as intelligent, reserved, and deeply religious. He was also, by every historical account available, shaken by what he was about to do. Here is where the myth dissolves. The popular image of the Ottoman fratricide is of a ruthless, ambitious sultan sweeping into power and gleefully eliminating competition. That image is wrong almost every time. The reality was more bureaucratic, and somehow that makes it worse. Mehmed III did not arrive at Topkapi Palace and immediately demand his brother's deaths. The sequence of events was more procedural than that. When Murad III died, the chief black eunuch, the Kizlar Agassi, who in 1595 was a man named Gazanfer Aga, along with the Valide Sultan, the Queen Mother, coordinated the immediate steps of succession. The new sultan had to be proclaimed. The Janissaries had to be paid their traditional accession bonus, called the Kulus Baksisi, to secure their loyalty. The religious establishment had to issue formal recognition, and then, under the provisions of the Kanun Name, the question of the princes had to be resolved. You are Mehmed III in this moment. You have just buried your father. You are wearing the robes of the Sultanate for the first time. The weight of an empire that stretches from Budapest to Baghdad, from Algiers to the edge of Persia, rests on your shoulders. Your advisors are not suggesting the fratricide. They are informing you of it. There is a difference. Some historical sources, particularly the chronicle of the contemporary Ottoman historian Ibrahim Pechevi, suggest that Mehmed wept during this period. Venetian Bailo reports from Constantinople in early 1595 describe the new sultan as visibly distressed in the days following his accession. Whether this was genuine grief or political theater is something historians still argue about, and probably always will. What is not argued is what happened next. The 19 princes were summoned. They were not told why. In some accounts, they were brought individually. In others, they were brought in small groups. The method used was strangulation by a silken bowstring, the traditional Ottoman method of royal execution, chosen specifically because it did not shed blood. Shedding the blood of a member of the Ottoman dynasty was considered sacrilegious, so they were strangled, carefully, according to protocol. And here is the detail that lodges in the brain and refuses to leave. The men who carried out the executions were called the mutes, palace servants who were deaf and mute, selected for the specific purpose of not being able to report what they witnessed or heard. The empire had, literally, built a workforce of people who could not testify. The 19 deaths were the headline, but buried underneath was a detail so strange that European diplomats initially refused to believe their own informants. Some of those princes were not teenagers. One of them left behind a pregnant wife, and the question of what happened to her child would quietly haunt Ottoman succession law for decades. This is the part of Ottoman palace history that gets the least attention, and that is a significant oversight, because the women of the imperial harem were not passive furniture in these events. They were political actors, and on the night of January 16, 1595, they had their own survival calculus to run. Let's be precise about the term harem, because the word has been so thoroughly distorted by centuries of European fantasy novels and Hollywood productions that it barely resembles the historical reality. The Ottoman imperial harem, the Harem-i-Humayun, was not primarily a sexual institution. It was a household, a very large, very hierarchical, very politically sophisticated household that operated by its own internal rules and produced some of the most capable political operators in the 16th century Ottoman world. The women who lived there were ranked. At the top was the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother. Below her were the Haseki, the favored concubines who had borne the Sultan's sons. Below them were the other concubines, ranked by favor and seniority. Below them were the servants, the attendants, the women who had entered the harem as children and worked their way up through a system that rewarded intelligence, loyalty, and absolute discretion. You are one of these women tonight. Your son is one of the 19. You have spent years building whatever small influence you possess inside these walls. You know how the system works. You know what the Kanuname says. And now, the night has come. There is essentially nothing you can do. The historical record contains fragments of what these women experienced. The Venetian ambassador in 1595 reported that the sounds from the harem quarters on the night of the executions were audible in other parts of the palace. An Ottoman chronicle describes women in mourning dress appearing in the corridors. Several of the prince's mothers were later relocated, removed from the main harem to the old palace, the Eski Saray, which served as a kind of retirement home for women who were no longer politically relevant. Being sent to the old palace was a soft exile. You were alive, you were housed and fed. You simply no longer mattered. Now about that pregnant wife. One of the 19 princes, sources vary on which one, and the name is not definitively established in the primary records, reportedly had a concubine who was pregnant at the time of his execution. This created a genuine legal problem. If the child was a boy, he would be a potential Ottoman dynastic heir. But he would also be the son of a man who had been executed as a threat to the reigning sultan. What exactly was his status? The Ottoman solution to this problem was characteristically pragmatic and quietly ruthless. The child, if it survived, was raised inside the palace system under close supervision. If it was a boy, the fact of his lineage was known but not advertised. He posed no immediate threat because he had no household, no supporters, and no network. The empire absorbed him and made him invisible. This is how systems of power actually survive. Not through constant violence, through the strategic management of information about who exists and who matters. The harem, in this sense, was not just a living space. It was an information containment system. What happened inside its walls, the grief, the fear, the small acts of resistance, the accommodations people made to survive, stayed inside its walls. The mutes who carried out the executions could not speak. The women who witnessed the aftermath were isolated. The chronicles that recorded these events were written by men who had access only to the official version. What we are left with 4 centuries later is an outline, and an outline of grief is still grief. Europe watched all of this with a mixture of horror and fascination. But here is what almost no one talks about. Several European monarchs, reading the reports from their Constantinople ambassadors, privately asked their own legal scholars whether something similar might work for them. The answer those scholars gave is more uncomfortable than you might expect. The year 1595 was not an abstract moment in European history. It was the middle of a continent in perpetual crisis. France had just finished 30 years of religious civil war that had included multiple royal assassinations and the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of 1572, in which somewhere between 5,000 and 30,000 French Protestants were killed in a single wave of state and mob violence. England was in the middle of the reign of Elizabeth I, who had never married, never named an heir, and whose succession question was the single most destabilizing political anxiety on the island. The Holy Roman Empire was a patchwork of competing Protestant and Catholic states, held together mostly by inertia and the fear of what would happen if it fell apart. In other words, Europe had absolutely no business being smug about Ottoman succession practices. And yet, publicly, European commentators were horrified. The Venetian dispatches from Constantinople, which are some of the most detailed and reliable primary sources we have for this period, describe the fratricide with language that emphasizes its barbarism, its paganism, its fundamental incompatibility with Christian civilization. The word Turk in 16th century European political discourse was already a shorthand for despotic cruelty, and the events of January 1595 were immediately folded into that existing narrative. Here is the thing, though. Privately, in correspondence that was not meant for public consumption, some European rulers and their advisors engaged with the Ottoman system in a more complicated way. The Spanish crown, dealing with its own succession anxieties around Philip II, had documents in which royal counselors discussed the Ottoman approach not with horror, but with a kind of envious exasperation. The underlying logic that a clearly defined, ruthlessly enforced succession mechanism prevented civil war was not actually irrational. It was just that the cost was too visible, too concentrated, too humanly legible. European succession violence was diffuse. It was spread across years, across battlefields, across famines caused by prolonged warfare. When the English fought the Wars of the Roses from 1455 to 1485, the death toll was catastrophic, but it was distributed across 30 years and hundreds of skirmishes. So no single image stuck in the mind the way 19 princes strangled in one night does. You are a European diplomat in 1595, reading the dispatch from your man in Constantinople. You are not a monster. You are a professional. And the thought that forms in your mind, the one you would never write in an official report, is something like, "At least they know who is in charge tomorrow morning." That thought is the most disturbing thing in this entire story, because it means the Ottoman law of fratricide was not alien to the logic of European statecraft. It was just a version of the same logic taken to its visible conclusion. The difference was not moral sophistication. The difference was theatrical preference. Europe preferred its succession violence to happen slowly, far away, and with enough narrative complexity that no single image could capture it. Mehmed III had a reign of 8 years, from 1595 to 1603. He is not remembered as a great sultan. He is remembered primarily for the fratricide and for the Battle of Carestès in 1596, where he personally commanded Ottoman forces to a significant victory against the Habsburgs, one of the last times an Ottoman sultan would personally lead troops in battle. The empire was already changing. The administrative complexity was growing faster than any one man or 19 brothers could contain. Within a generation, the Ottoman Empire abandoned the law of fratricide entirely. Not because it became more humane, because something replaced it that was, in a different way, just as cruel, and the new system produced a dynasty so psychologically damaged that it arguably contributed to the empire's eventual collapse. The law of fratricide was officially practiced for roughly 2 centuries, from the reign of Mehmed II in the mid-15th century to the early 17th century. The event of 1595, 19 brothers in one night, was, in hindsight, its peak and its breaking point simultaneously. Because even by Ottoman standards, 19 was a number that required explanation. After Mehmed III, the Ottoman court began a slow shift toward an alternative system. Instead of killing princes, they would imprison them. The practice became institutionalized under Ahmed I, who came to power in 1603 and chose not to execute his brother Mustafa, a decision that broke with 2 centuries of precedent. Instead, Mustafa was confined to a part of the palace complex that became known over time as the kafes, the cage. The kafes was a set of rooms within the harem complex. Princes lived there, isolated from the outside world, under close supervision, with limited access to information, education, or human contact beyond a small number of servants. They were alive. They were housed and fed and occasionally given entertainment. They were also, systematically, being prevented from developing the competencies a ruler would need. You are a prince in the kafes now. You have been here for years. maybe decades. You have no military experience because you have never been posted to a province. You have no administrative experience because you have never governed anything. You have no political network because your contact with the outside world has been managed and filtered since childhood. You have spent your formative years in a gilded set of rooms with servants who are selected for their loyalty to whoever is watching you, reading books, and perhaps going slowly out of your mind. When your turn on the throne comes, if it comes, you will be catastrophically unprepared for it. This is not speculation. The historical record of the 17th century Ottoman sultans is, in significant measure, a record of the Kafes system's consequences. Mustafa I, who was confined to the Kafes for 14 years before becoming sultan, was widely described by contemporaries as mentally unstable. He was deposed twice. Ibrahim I, who became sultan in 1640, after spending 22 years in the Kafes, was similarly described by Ottoman chronicles as erratic and disconnected from political reality. He was eventually deposed and executed by his own janissaries and court officials in 1648. The empire had traded one form of institutional violence for another. The fratricide killed princes quickly and cleanly with silk cords before they could become threats. The Kafes killed princes slowly, with isolation and idleness, and then placed the psychologically damaged survivors on the throne of an empire that required competent management. Think about what you are watching here from a systems perspective. An institution identified a real problem: succession instability caused by multiple potential claimants. It implemented a brutal but internally consistent solution. That solution became politically and socially unsustainable because of one night in 1595, when the human cost was simply too concentrated, too visible, too impossible to rationalize away with statistics. So the institution replaced it with a different solution that seemed more humane on the surface, but was structurally worse in outcome. This is a pattern that does not belong only to the Ottoman Empire. You can find it in corporate succession planning, in political parties that sideline reformers rather than firing them, in families that manage difficult relatives through exclusion rather than confrontation. The visible violence gets replaced by the invisible kind. The invisible kind is often harder to name and harder to stop. By the late 17th and early 18th centuries, the Kafes system was contributing to a visible decline in effective Ottoman leadership at precisely the moment when European states, partly in response to their own succession crises, were developing more stable administrative and legal frameworks for governance. The competition was institutional, and the Ottomans were fielding monarchs who had been, quite literally, prepared for nothing. Now, pause here for a second. We are halfway through a story about events from 1595, and you may be noticing that some of what we have described sounds uncomfortably familiar. Systems that sacrifice individuals for institutional stability. Power structures that manage threats through isolation rather than elimination. The way institutional logic can override human judgment until the human cost becomes too large to ignore. Before we reach the conclusion, what do you think? Drop a comment below. Does the Ottoman succession system remind you of anything in the modern world? We genuinely want to read your perspective. The last Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed VI, was deposed in 1922. The empire that had once executed 19 princes in a single night ended not with a dramatic fratricide, but with a man boarding a British warship in the dark and sailing away from Constantinople, the city his ancestors had conquered, never to return. He didn't look back. But the story of those 19 princes did not fully end in 1595. One small thread of it survived into the 20th century, in the form of a legal principle that Ottoman jurists developed specifically to justify the fratricide, a principle that legal scholars argue influenced later theories of state sovereignty in ways we are still working through today. So let us go back to that palace. January 16th, 1595. 19 young men eating what they do not know is their last meal. We started there because the image is specific and human and refuses to become abstract. But here is what that image means now, after everything we have examined. Those 19 deaths were not a failure of the system. They were the system working exactly as designed. They were the logical endpoint of a legal framework built on the premise that institutional stability is worth any individual cost. That the order of the world, to use Mehmed II's own phrase, requires the occasional human sacrifice at its foundations. And the truly unsettling part, the part that makes this relevant rather than merely historical, is that no one in 1595 Constantinople thought they were doing something monstrous. The jurists had approved it. The precedent existed. The paperwork was in order. They were following the law. Laws are written by people. People have interests. And sometimes, the most dangerous words in a legal document are the ones that sound the most reasonable. Mehmed III ruled for 8 years. The empire survived for another 3 centuries. And somewhere in the historical record, if you look closely enough, is a document in which a scholar carefully explains, in precise legal language, why it was acceptable for 19 boys to be strangled with silk cords so that one man could sit on a throne without worrying about his brothers. Most scholars approved of this. Let action be taken accordingly. Before you go, this video took significant research to put together, and your feedback genuinely shapes what we cover next. If you found this useful or thought-provoking, or if something here surprised you, take 30 seconds and leave a comment. What did you feel watching this? What questions does it leave you with? We read every single one. Subscribe to Buried Crimes History if you want more content like this, and we will see you in the next dark corner of history.